English, as our all panelists will have the presentation in English. So again, good afternoon. I'm very pleased that we have had already tradition to present the main outcome and main messages of the World Energy Outlook at this conference, and this year it is also so. So I have really pleasure to introduce Pawel Olejarnik, who will from the International Energy Agency, who will present the key messages of this year World Energy Outlook. Let me introduce also other panelists. Professor Peter Baláž from the University of Economics in Bratislava. Jaroslav Žlábek, Director General Schneider Electric Slovakia, and Marek Senkovič, Chief Economic Advisor to CEO of SLOVNAFT, member of the MOL Group. So without any further ado, I will give the floor to Pawel Olejarnik, and I think by his presentation he will set the scene to discuss the not only Visegrad 4 and the European challenges, but the challenges of the whole energy sector globally. Pawel, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here at the Central European Energy Conference to present to you the future of energy markets as the International Energy Agency sees it in the World Energy Outlook publication. Throughout the years as we've been coming to this conference, we have seen that each year has brought about a lot of changes in energy markets, and the year 2015, while it's not yet finished, has already shown us a lot of changes in the markets. First of all, 2015 is clearly a year in which all the fossil fuels have reached very low levels compared to historical levels. If we look at oil prices, they are about half of the three-digit prices we used to be used to over the past couple of years. Likewise, gas prices have benefited due to the drop in oil prices, and gas prices are now also decreasing. If we look also at coal today trades for about $50 per ton. Last time we saw such prices was in 2000. So clearly 2015 will go down in history as a year of low fossil fuel prices. And this is starting to create problems for certain industries, such as the oil and gas industry. Already in 2015, the oil and gas industry globally decreased its investments by 20%. And according to the analysis at the International Energy Agency, we expect that the oil and gas industry will further decrease its investments next year. But there are also signals that the energy market is becoming more green. And a key signal here is the upcoming negotiations, climate negotiations that will take place in Paris, and the COP21 negotiations. Because ahead of these negotiations in Paris, over 150 countries have actually put down pledges towards how they want to decarbonize their energy system. This is a big step change compared to the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol used to cover about 15% of energy markets, and the INDs and the COP21, the pledges before COP21, are already covering 90% of global energy-related emissions. And perhaps the more important fact for us at the International Energy Agency and for you is that 50% of the pledges made at COP actually have specific targets, policies related to energy. 2014, so last year, was also a breakthrough year for renewables. Renewables became the world's second largest provider of electricity behind coal. Renewables overtook natural gas. Also, many countries benefited from the fact that fossil fuel prices, especially oil and gas, have been decreasing, and countries such as India and Indonesia have been removing fossil fuel subsidies, which we estimate today values at around $1 trillion globally. So there are positive signs of how the energy market is changing, but as we know, changes will be gradual. There will be cyclical aspects of it as well as structural. If we look at the world energy outlook going forward to 2040, energy will grow. That's a given. However, energy will not grow in all the countries. In fact, according to our analysis, we find that energy use in the developed countries, already peaked in 2007. So countries such as the European Union, United States, and Japan are actually facing a future where energy demand is going to be decreasing, thanks to increased energy efficiency, for example. So the truth about the future of energy markets is that it's shifting towards Asia, and the key players here being China and India. China, of course, many of us are aware, over the past decade it was the leader of the growth in energy markets. But its future energy use is slowing down as the economy slows down and as the Chinese authorities begin to promote more energy efficiency and also restructure the economy from an industrial economy to a service-based economy. Therefore, India steps into the picture and becomes, in our projections, the single largest source of energy going forward. Other countries, of course, like Latin America, elsewhere, will also see increasing demand. And I personally find it also interesting the increase in the Middle East, because many of us assume that the Middle East is a region that will just produce energy and export it. But in fact, the Middle East will be a key demand center also. So the shift to Asia is a key development in energy markets going forward. So is the developments in technology. We often read in the media that solar technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and in our projections this trend continues. Renewable energies become cheaper, so does energy efficiency become more and more affordable. And this allows us to start to decarbonize the energy sector more and more. Today, the fossil fuels account for around 80% of the energy sector, and by 2040, we expect fossil fuels, each of them, coal, oil, and gas, to account for 25% of the energy mix. So the decarbonization is taking place clearly. At the same time, while renewable energy technologies and energy efficiency is becoming more affordable, oil and gas is becoming more expensive. Because in many cases we have already produced the cheapest sources that are available, and we have to turn to more expensive technologies to produce oil. For example, hydraulic fracturing to produce tight oil or unconventional oil in the United States. And how the cost of oil and gas technologies will evolve will be very important, how the oil price will go forward. Because the oil price will stimulate investments in more expensive oil and gas resources. If we look at the energy market today and oil prices that are around between $40 to $50 per barrel, if prices stay at this rate, at the International Energy Agency, we find that unconventional oil production in the United States will actually decrease next year. So while unconventional oil was the big story of oil markets over the past couple of years, the current level of oil prices does not allow for an increase in production if prices stay at these levels. Hence, we find that you need a price between at least $70 to $80 in order to ensure that unconventional oil keeps on producing in the United States. And this oil will be very essential because it's an oil source that is flexible. It will react much more flexibly to the changes in oil prices and help the market more easily balance itself. We assume that oil prices will increase to $80 per barrel in 2020. However, it's true that one has to look at the other possibility. and the other possibility being that oil prices may stay lower for a longer time. As a special analysis in this year's World Energy Outlook, we provide a low oil price scenario in which we look what would the energy future look like if oil prices would stay at the level of $50 to $55 per barrel for a much longer time. Of course, there are benefits. Many oil importers would be happy because they will have cheaper oil to import. However, the lower oil prices will also mean that we will take energy efficiency less seriously. There will be less incentives to invest in energy efficiency. And therefore, we will actually start importing more and demanding more oil. So while you look at the price signal as being a benefit, it can lead you to actually importing more oil. And the majority of this oil will actually come from the Middle East, according to our analysis. So by 2040, the world will be actually much more dependent on the Middle East than it has ever been in history because of the low oil prices. So therefore, it's not really that evident that if low oil prices continue, that it's actually of benefit to us as energy consumers. And we also have to look at it from the angle of the producers. If prices stay low, we're going to ask them to produce more oil so that we can import it, but they're going to export it at a cheaper price. So they're going to get less money, which is not going to be of benefit to their economies, which are often very oil dependent. Therefore, at the International Energy Agency, we believe that a future where low oil prices persist is quite unlikely because this will be potentially of detriment to the economies of the exporting countries. Moving from oil to natural gas, a key fuel that's often discussed in the European Union. In our projections, European Union will remain the largest importer of gas going forward. However, there's a new key trade center emerging, and that's Asia, developing Asia specifically. If you look at the balance today, Asia is more or less self-sufficient. The amount of gas that China and India demand can be produced by countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia. But if we go forward, there's going to be a strong growth of gas demand in Asia because many countries want to decarbonize their energy system and also avoid local air pollution. While Asia can also increase its production, this still means that there's going to be a substantial increase of imports. We find that developing Asia by 2040 will be importing 400 billion cubic meters of gas. And the big uncertainty with these import levels is whether Asia will actually be able to expand its production. Because if you look at our projections, the majority of the increase in gas production in Asia is actually coming from China through shale gas. We project about 220 BCM of unconventional gas in China by 2040. There are many uncertainties here, however. The geology is not yet entirely proven. Costs, it's a question how cost of hydraulic fracturing will evolve in China. So there are downside risks that should Asia not be able to produce its gas, it might actually need to import much more gas. Speaking of Asia, I'd like to turn to two key countries, China and India. China has clearly, for all of us in the energy sector, been the key story of the past decade. China's economic growth was expanding, so was its appetite for energy. However, the government now in Beijing and in many municipalities in China is facing issues of slowing economic growth as well as local air pollution. And they are changing the energy system. In fact, in the past 2 5-year plans, China has been announcing policies that have substantially changed the energy system. And if we look forward, one of course expects China's GDP to continue growing substantially, but the surprise that might come to many is that actually the growth in energy demand will actually be much slower compared to what it was historically. This stems from two key aspects, or in fact three. You have all heard that the Chinese authorities are slowing down their targets for economic growth. Already a couple of weeks ago, they announced that most likely they will target 6.5% GDP growth in the next 13 five-year plan of China. Additionally, they are pursuing a move towards the service sector. They want to move away from industrialization. And it's industries that actually consume much more energy. So if China manages to move more and more towards services, their energy intensity will decrease. Additionally, China is promoting a lot energy efficiency. And this move towards energy efficiency is another factor that allows China to slow down its energy demand. So we're actually facing the perspective that around 2040, Chinese total energy demand might plateau, start slowing down, which I think is a big development to keep in mind, especially if you're in the energy markets and you always assumed that China will grow. Now, if we break down this energy demand path that we are projecting for China, we can additionally see two very key findings for coal and oil. In our projections, coal demand in China will more or less stay flat for the next 25 years. This is an abrupt change relative to the history of Chinese coal demand. China has been the key driver of the increase in global coal demand. If we look at oil markets, likewise, the Chinese here are promoting more and more energy efficiency, both in passenger vehicles and heavy freight, so trucks, lorries, buses, and this will allow them to start slowing down the growth in oil demand. They will still become the world's largest consumer of oil and largest importer of oil, but their oil demand will start slowing down towards 2040. So the scene enters for three new colors in the Chinese energy mix, and that is natural gas, which becomes a favored fuel as a means of decarbonizing and reducing local air pollution in the Chinese energy system. Nuclear and renewables, China, it will actually be the single largest source of nuclear and renewables growth around the world. Turning to India, India is the new giant, if you like, in energy markets, especially in Asia. India has a large population, and by 2020, India is set to overtake China as the most populous country in the world. And along with this will come strong economic growth, as well as industrialization. The current Modi government in India is putting a large emphasis towards developing India more towards an industrial country. So while China is shifting away from industrialization, India wants to move towards industrialization. And as I mentioned previously, industrial sector is much more energy intensive. So this will mean India will need more energy. Additionally, about 250 million people in India today don't have access to electricity. So there is a strong demand for energy. Therefore, India will take a key driving role in many energy commodities, including in coal. We find that India will become the world's second largest consumer and second largest producer of coal. India will also be the largest driver of growth in oil demand. We're talking about an increase of 6 million barrels per day. But India will also try to go both ways. It will not only focus on fossil fuels, but the Indian government is very ambitious with targets that it's placing on solar energy. I think this is a good moment, speaking about solar energy, to also turn to the future of the power sector. Within our analysis, what you can see is that the energy sector is clearly going to more and more decarbonize going forward. The largest growth in electricity generation will actually come from renewables. Renewables will provide as much electricity as coal, gas, nuclear, and oil put together going forward. If we look at the specific fuels, nuclear, here the future mainly lies in Asia, with China, India, Korea, as well as in Japan, where it's expected a restart of nuclear energy will happen. Gas-fired generation, here no surprise that China will be a key driver, but the other one that might come as a surprise to you will be that the Middle East will be a key demand center of gas for power generation. We're in 2015, but most likely next year or in a couple of years, the Middle East as a whole will actually consume as much gas as the European Union. A fact that I think sometimes we overlook about the thirst for energy in the Middle East itself. Coal, as countries try to decarbonize, the growth in coal will not be as strong as before, and in fact coal will be overtaken by renewables by 2030 as the leading fuel for electricity. Turning to renewables, renewables so far have been often globally satisfied through hydroelectricity, but going forward, as technologies such as wind and solar become less expensive, you will see a strong growth in wind and also solar. One of the reasons why the energy sector is able to decarbonize as well is that we are not only producing more energy from low carbon fuels, it's also because we are actually consuming less energy through energy efficiency. Energy efficiency here is a key player, or if you like, a new fuel in the future of energy markets. We have already made very big advances in terms of energy efficiency. If you look at 2005, only 15% of global energy was covered by efficiency standards. Today, we are at 30%. And going forward, we assume the world will cover 40% of its energy through energy efficiency standards. We're talking, for example, about energy efficiency standards in cars, how much oil you have to put in your tank in order to go a certain amount of kilometers, or industrial boilers, or boilers in houses to produce heat. There's a very strong potential still remaining for energy efficiency to reduce our need for energy going forward. So I'd like to close my presentation focusing on climate change and the upcoming negotiations in Paris. At the International Energy Agency, we have looked at all of the pledges governments have made before the COP21 meeting in Paris. And what we find is that there's an unprecedented effort of countries putting down plans and targets of how they want to change their energy system going forward to help climate change. And according to our analysis, if you put together all of the pledges, this means that the world is on a 2.7 degrees Celsius trajectory going forward. So it's not yet the 2.0 degrees Celsius target that we are all hoping for and that is being talked in climate change negotiations. It's 2.7. So we're not there yet, but it's clearly a big step change compared to the Kyoto Protocol, for example. So there are more efforts needed, and we as the International Energy Agency are saying that there are important steps that have to be made in Paris. And one of those key steps is that if countries are going to come forward with these pledges, then we should create a system whereby every 5 years we revisit all of these pledges and see what progress these countries have made and make a decision, can we go further? Because if we do not track the efforts that we are making on climate change, we will not know where we are heading for and how much more we have to do. And we all know that time is running out unless you are a climate skeptic. One example of how impressive is the energy transition that is being offered in Paris through the climate pledges is looking at electricity generation. If you look at the history of electricity generation, you will see that pretty much CO2 emissions from power plants have grown almost at the same rate as the increase in CO2 emissions from those power plants. But now, based on the climate pledges countries have made, if you look at energy efficiency and the amount of decarbonization through renewables and nuclear that they are proposing, according to us, this means that electricity generation will actually increase, so people can have more electricity, but CO2 emissions to 2030 could actually stay flat, which I think is a very vivid example of the possibility that we have if we put strong targets and if we direct these targets in the right places, such as low carbon fuels and energy efficiency. So let me conclude by saying that low oil prices that we see today may seem to all of us as a very welcome piece of news. But if you look at it from the aspect of oil producers or the market in general, if these prices persist, we could be actually entering a situation where we'll be more and more dependent on specific sources of supply. So while low oil prices to a consumer might seem good, in the long term this can mean a degrading of your energy security. Asia is clearly the new chapter in the future of energy markets, and here the key players are India and China. China is entering the stage, if you like, whereas China over the past decade has had a strong appetite for energy, and now China is considering how to slow down that appetite and how to ensure that it is developed in a much more sustainable manner. And I think China should be commended, while it is the world's largest emitter of CO2. If you look at the Chinese pledge that they have made towards the COP negotiations in Paris, the Chinese are actually wanting to stop their CO2 emissions by 2030. I think that's a very bold target, and clearly China is putting many policies in place to achieve that target. The energy transition is underway in many aspects, moving away from fossil fuels to low carbon technologies, but also a move towards encompassing much more climate change within energy policies. Despite all of these points, we should still not forget that energy security will be a constant preoccupation for us, including in the European Union, where if you look at our projections in the World Energy Outlook, you will actually find that the European Union, for all the 3 fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, will become more import dependent. So energy security is still an issue even as we decarbonize. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think that the World Energy Outlook opens several very important questions, like could oil prices stay lower for longer? What would it take for this happen, and what would it mean for energy security and for the energy transition? Second, India is set for a period of rapid, sustained growth in energy demand. How could this reshape the energy scene? What the new climate pledges mean for the way that the world meets its rising needs for energy? What are the implications of the rising coverage of energy efficiency policies and the growing competitiveness of renewables? Is the unconventional gas revolution going to go global or to remain a North American phenomenon? We have three commentators in this panel. First would be the Professor Baláž. Floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I have prepared my presentation in English, and now my feeling after the presentation of Pawel is that we drinking together in the evening and we have prepared our presentations together. So from this point of view, I need to use another and maybe new arguments listening his speech, and allow me from this point of view to continue in my speech in Slovak for having the precise possibility and argumentation for everything what is now the part of my commentary to the VO. What is very important, and we unify together with Pawel about the most pillar of the new situation in the sphere of the energy. And firstly, that really we are living in the time of the globalization. Žijeme v období globalizácie a aj keď sa nám to nezdá, hranice sa búrajú a väčšinu akceptujeme to, že sú zbúrané smerom dovnútra Európskej únie. Oni sa búrajú prakticky všade navonok a žiadny zo sektorov svetového hospodárstva nezažíva tú silu globalizácie tak ako sektor energetiky. Môžeme diskutovať na všetky témy, ktoré sú súčasťou tohoto výhľadu. Je to jednoznačne tak. Zostal by som najprv pri tom argumente, ktorý bol aj použitý, a ten sa týkal cien ropy. Je reálny fakt, že tieto ceny klesli, a pokiaľ zoberieme si taký poldekádový výhľad, obdobie roku 2009, kedy cena ropy bola na $120 a dnes sa predáva na Brente pod $50, hovorí o tom, že tá cena klesla zhruba o 50%. Aj politicky a ekonomicky sa často vysvetľuje, že tým pádom náklady producentov aj energií a samozrejme aj hotových výrobkov z tohto pohľadu sú nižšie a malo by to nejakým spôsobom zvyšovať konkurencieschopnosť na medzinárodných trhoch. S týmto argumentom môžeme nejakým spôsobom súhlasiť iba do určitej miery. A to hlavne preto, pretože pokiaľ si zoberieme vývoj menového páru medzi americkým dolárom, v ktorom sa v podstate tradujú všetky rozhodujúce suroviny, a medzi eurom ten pokles zhruba 1,6 na 1,06, kde to osciluje posledné mesiace, hovorí o tom, že
we see the fall of euro by approximately 40%. So 2/3 minus 40%, it means the differentiation is pretty much lower. When it comes to argument number 2, which relates alternative sources of energy, we can agree with what the outlook says when it comes to volumes and the efforts to increase the participation. And of course, a number of arguments are used. But with relation to what Pawel has said, and when it comes to China, China today is the largest producer of energy, electric power, when it comes to wind, when it comes to photovoltaics, and it is exactly China that pretty much is the decisive factor on which everything depends when it comes to prices of energy, whether directly or indirectly. And the bold plans of the EU, the EU 2020 plan, which confirms the real fact that we've decided to take some specific trajectory. You know, this is always somehow balance that every single savings in every single EU country will automatically lead to increase of production of emissions or other indirect consequences for the environment, mainly from the position of the Asian economies like China, India. And when it comes to saving, there's a couple of figures available for you, but in relation to this fact, I'd like to point out two factors that are not very much discussed, and that's the question of subsidies, or state aid, if you like. This outlook quotes that in the year 2014, the volume of subsidies was approximately 490 billion, and very shortly it should be 610 billion, and the process should somehow continue. My comment on this: exactly the low price of energy should now create space for us to finally start to deal with subsidies. And the subsidies, I believe, are mainly concerned. They mainly concern coal, and they very much they cause very substantial damage because they negatively impact on competitiveness. And subsidizing energy source, which basically is unprofitable, it leads to companies not to search for rational solutions, and based on almost fictitious prices of energy, we cannot actually establish competitive real price of any product in the world market, or at least the process is very complicated, and of course politically we see behind this a number of jobs, there's a number of other consequences inside every national economy. But if you look at the argument from the political perspective, it is quite obvious that in the end there is not going to be any large effort by the EU to change this, but we need to realize one basic essential fact, and that is that Europe is losing its international competitiveness very quickly, and as long as it doesn't deal with these problems, the question is how it's going to balance the shortcomings related to unreal prices of some sorts of energy.
Ja sa hodne zaoberám Čínou, robil som na ňu niekoľko kníh a čím o nej viacej študujem, tak tým som z toho nervóznejší.
Study about China, I would like to show you a couple of arguments. It's a real fact that China is undergoing or is transforming from dynamic development to the period when it is becoming more stabilized. In the last quarter, it has achieved 6.9%. The annual average growth will be somewhere around 6.5 with low inflation. The overall outlook presents that the economy has stabilized, it has settled the internal infrastructure, dozens of thousands of kilometers of highways are connecting the country or different points of the extremities of countries. They have started building the Silk Road again as a real road, and this means that as a couple of years ago China was extracting corroded submarines from the sea. This has changed. It seems that it has no direct impact on us, but I try to counter-argue. And there are multiple serious arguments that I want to present. It's not true that China produces commodities with low value added. The economy has transformed. It is a serious player when it comes to sophisticated products they have got no tradition in. We know what big problems were when the highway was built in Poland prior to the World Championship, but look at China. They have started building highways in China, in Oman, in other countries, so they have really made a progress, and this is translated in their economy. I went to the ghost city in China last summer, but this doesn't talk about the work productivity. It talks only about China using new sources of energy. It's not only wind and photovoltaics. Now they are going to fund nuclear energy power plant in Great Britain. They have increased the share of nuclear energy. And this is an interesting graph. The relation of China and the coal prices at commodity markets, in commodity markets. Until recently, it was $220 for a metric ton. Now it's somewhere around $50. And if we look at the China's position in commodity market, China has imported more than 50% of the world production of coal. So it all ended up in Chinese ovens and Chinese system. They need less energy inputs, and well, on one hand there is dynamics of growth. They are somewhere between 5 to 8%. Before it was 17%. This has a significant impact on price, which is somewhere around $50. Australia is going to lose about 2% of GDP growth due to the dropping prices of those commodities. The same applies to other countries. China, that imports coal for 1/4 of it from the previous price, has ever decreasing level of price of labor. This cheap labor with cheap products and cheap commodities produce Chinese steel, and the Chinese steel is going up to end up in our markets. And since we work with high labor costs, subsidized coal, we are getting Chinese steel that is somewhere at half of the level of our price. So it's not only by the consumption goods, it's about the influx of foreign investments into areas and countries that felt that they were pretty safe, as Germany, because they used to produce high quality products and there was not such a strong competition, and all of a sudden we do have Chinese commodities and products in those sectors. I would like to try to draw the conclusions. And let's say the buzzwords of the European politicians. We do have about 3.5 million jobs in the industry. There will be dozens of positions that will need to be closed. This is a fact. The world is being reformed. We are going through transitions, better times, harder times. The major problem is what kind of adaptation programs the European Union has done. This outlook you have here is until 2030, 2040. It talks about adaptation plans. Well, the question is whether there is time for those plans. Because discussing that the unit consumption of energy will drop to half, well, it's a questionable thing, and there are many serious decisions that need to be made in Europe in order to be able to manage with the new situation in international markets.
Asi by nakoniec bolo dobré povedať, že čo...
At the end, it would be good to say or good to think about what to do with this. Please take attention. This is a graph of 2 decades of EU business with China. We see that there was 100 to 150 billion debt produced by European Union in the trade flows, and it's about 600 billion of turnover. But look at 2015, 2016, and the forecasts for those years. So I would like to leave the room for discussion. I would like to pinpoint the fact that in this 1 year outline, we need to be able to read and to see what's behind the figures. I wanted to highlight the fact that we are industrial country. You know what big problems the automotive industry is facing, Volkswagen is facing. Now we have huge problems with Chinese steel coming into the European market. The first reactions in the Czech Republic were to intervene at the level of European Commission when it comes to anti-dumping. That we need to adopt anti-dumping custom. I really don't believe that the Chinese price or the price of Chinese steel really that they are dumping the price, because their price is based in a real scenario and context. In 2016, the status of development country or developing country in the WTO is going to be closed. We are imposing tariff obstacles and various types of limitations to influx of Chinese products. But as soon as China is going to change its status into developed country, any quantitative measures will cease to exist and will not be imposed. And then I don't know what can happen on January the 1st in 2017, because the competitiveness of Europe will drop. We can see the influx of direct foreign investments we actually don't see. Who keeps on saying that 70% of the investments come from Hong Kong? Nobody knows who stands behind Hong Kong, you know. There are those chains of companies, one company buying other Chinese companies, buying distribution, French or English companies, etc. And this is all happening without us reflecting that the basis of energy policy are being changed in Europe and the level of participation is lower and lower. Thank you for your attention.
Ďakujeme veľmi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor, for your insights on implications for the European market and for Slovakia as such, and the industries which are of key importance for our economy. The next comment will come from Mr. Žlábek, the Director General from Schneider Electric Slovakia. Mr. Žlábek, the floor is yours.
Brocková, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to present to you the position of Schneider Electric concerning world energy outlook. Schneider Electric is the world energy leader in energy efficiency and automation. We invest yearly approximately €1 billion in new technologies, mainly related to energy efficiency. So for us, it's absolutely critical to, I would say, have the long-term visibility and clear strategy in terms of energy efficiency. We believe that sustainable, efficient, safe and reliable energy is part of the human rights. The question is if the current setup of the energy production and distribution is sustainable. We believe that there is a great opportunity for improvement. as was mentioned, there are some trends. I would like to add some of them, which are, I would say, provoking the rise of energy demand. One of them is urbanization. So just for reference, it is expected that in the next 20-30 years, the number of cities with more than 10 million citizens will double. Of course, it will not happen most probably in Central Europe, but as you could see, this trend is coming mainly from emerging countries. The second next trend is digitization. What has been said is that in terms of economy, the economy is moving more to services. So I would say the industrialization is not demanding so much energy, but you should bear in your mind that also digitization is requiring a lot of energy. So it's not for free. And the third one, which I would like to mention, is industrialization. Industry is today one-third of, requires one-third of worldwide energy consumption. So from this point of view, in countries like Slovakia, which is still, I would say, investing in new industrial opportunities, definitely it's going to have impact on energy consumption. So as you could see in the presentation of the energy outlook, there will be growth of energy consumption coming mainly from emerging countries. And of course, there is a request on sustainability. So at the end, it brings what we call energy dilemma, which is requiring 4 times more efficiency worldwide. And I would like to remind to you that this is not, I would say, only about CO2 emissions and efficiency by itself, which is definitely very important, but it is bringing also new technologies. So in order to stay competitive, we should bring on the market new sustainable technologies. We are here showing just a few of the trends which are confirming that the energy efficiency is not only the term by itself, but here we are bringing some evidence that energy efficiency as such is going to support the growth of GDP in the countries. It's bringing new job opportunities. By the way, the European Commission is estimating 2 million jobs creations in Europe. And I would say the technology already, it started. So for example, in Slovakia, there are some projects which are starting with smart technologies, smart grid and smart cities. So it's already bringing its results. I will go directly to our position concerning the energy outlook. So current situation is, it has been said, the first saving has been delivered. So the technology exists. But what is true and what was been mentioned here is that the attention concerning targets for efficiency, energy efficiency mainly, has dropped from consideration. So in order to keep the momentum, we need to come back to the basics, and like in the business, we should say, okay, what we expect here. Because without any objective, without any target, there will be no investment, and the momentum can drop down, and Europe can lose competitiveness, because what you could see from the outlook is that China, and not only China, but also US and the others, they are investing in energy efficiency, and it brings technologies which are, I would say, at the end, paying by itself. The potential exists here. So what we say is that energy efficiency and demand-side management are the two sides of the same coin. So at the end, we propose to combine energy efficiency and demand-side management. The potential can be very high in some sectors. So you could see that it's coming from industry, it's coming from building. So there are big opportunities in these two areas. Just for your reference, the European Commission is saying that 1% of energy saving can reduce the import of gas by 2.6%. So this can also improve the safety and reliability in terms of, I would say, security of the countries and European Union. And by our experience, we know that there are already good returns on investment. In industry, we see already some return approximately in 10 months or even less. But in order to move forward, we see here some barriers which need to be overcome. So commitment and measurements. I already mentioned this. Without commitment and measurement, there will be no investment, and it will be really hard to measure where we are and compare ourselves to the rest of the world, because we are not living, I would say, only in Europe, but we have to compare ourselves with the rest of the world. Financing, you could see that the price of oil is volatile. There are some scenarios. So it needs, I would say, to find a way how to subsidize the investment into energy efficiency. And last but not least, it needs a consumer's engagement, to give a chance to consumer to decide how and when and in which area they would like to invest, and also make them aware about what is possible here. In terms of our messages, so really the target should be here to reduce the cost of Europe's energy and to support the climate transition. Energy efficiency target is an opportunity to strengthen green and digital economy in Europe. So again, it's about new technologies and about competitiveness. And we should give the objectives, but countries should have, I would say, certain flexibility in the way how to reach them, because for small economies, for example, like Slovakia, we could see that Slovakia cannot simply compete to big countries in the whole scenario. So countries should be able to select, I would say, their own area where they would like to go and they want to invest. Here I would like to mention one term, which is prosumer. So we should deploy, it says here smart grids, but it's really smart technologies to enable prosumers. For people which are not, I would say, understanding what this word means, so prosumer, it means in the same time producer and consumer. You know that today you can, as a consumer, invest into renewable energies and deliver back to the network, so you are becoming the producer in the same time. So here, really, I would say you as a consumer on demand side, you should have a certain flexibility in order to be able to deliver energy to the network and to contribute, I would say, to the complex stability. And also, what I would like to mention here, if you are proactive consumer, you can help to shave the peaks of the energy consumption, which is today, I would say, the source of extreme cost. In one country, I would not mention which one, you should know that, for example, 40 megawatts are used only 8 hours a year. So it means in reality that you need to build 400 megawatts power plant just for 8 hours. You can understand the economy, even maybe not all of you are not economists by itself. Encourage the employment of prosumers in commercial but also industrial sector. So it's not only about ourselves, you know, putting the photovoltaics on the roofs or making the windmill on the ground, but also it's very important to put it in industry. And of course, facilitate distribution network modernization. I believe that there will be some questions concerning cybersecurity, because it's again about data and its management. So here we propose also to create a platform where this, I would say, security challenges should be discussed. Just for reference, we at Schneider Electric, we have a long experience. And what we see today and what we are working on is convergence of IT and OT technologies. So in order that the production and the process technology is bringing its own results, it should be converged somehow with IT technology. One of the way how to do it is Internet of Things. So we work on the embedding of chips into, I would say, almost all devices, which will by itself communicate and control what is happening. and bringing the information which is needed to optimize the energy consumption. So what we believe in is that energy optimization and process optimizations are pretty much related together, and this is where we are, as I said, investing a lot of money to support the energy efficiency. So what we say, life is on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And the last commentator is Marek Senkovič from SLOVNAFT.
Vážené dámy, vážení páni, rád by som nadviazal na skvelé príspevky mojich predrečníkov aj nad tradične profesionálny report od Svetovej energetickej agentúry. Už dlhšiu dobu sami ako reprezentanti biznisu vnímame, že tie trendy, ktoré tu boli načrtnuté Pawel,
perceive the trends outlined by Pawel and other experts that are just standard trends. I'm representing oil refinery, but there could be very easily a representative of a gas company here. But we all understand that the traditional energetics is over, and there is the situation is completely different. Let's see who is going to win the battle. We are going to join the battle, of course. The world wants to increase the life standard of the population, but without automatic increase of energy consumption. It was one-to-one correlation, but this has changed. The development as a result of technological evolution that has been going on for the past 10 years is also a result of a pressure of the energy producers and commodity producers to produce, yes, on one hand, but with lower energy consumption and demand. This is also a result of small structural changes and subtle structural changes in macroeconomics. Look at the young generation, 15, 20-year-old. Those people don't feel the need to own something such as car, but they want to have a comfortable, cheap service, public transportation with fast internet. This is a transition from ownership economy to sharing economy. People don't need to own CD recorder player and etc. People need to have a fast internet connection to be able to listen to their music online. They need to have the comfort. They don't need to own. This is the major macroeconomic change. And we also see the 3D printing will develop, and many things that are now produced in one place will be sort of transferred or sent virtually to another place, and it will be printed out. So millions will be saved on transportation. The old generation doesn't feel the need to travel so much. We see the production of plastic, construction materials, various resources is 2 to 3 times less energy consuming than the well-established old products. Those are trends that are around, that are unfolding, and in 5 years' time we are going to talk about those as almost obsolete. The energy consumption is on one hand decreasing in some countries, but the higher importance is put to the environmental protection. What Pawel was talking about was that China has come to acknowledging the fact that they cannot, the polluted cities result in ill inhabitants that generate high costs to healthcare. So this needs to be changed, and the energy consumption will plateau somewhere. At some time, well, OECD countries, it is presumed that until 2040 the oil consumption will drop by 10 million barrels per day. Within EU, it will be by 4 million barrels per day. This is 1/3 of today's consumption if we translate it into details. And I'm not talking about the implications of Dieselgate on oil industry, because there are many question marks open. This actually means that in the horizon of the approaching upcoming decades, about 30 refineries out of 100 in EU and the surrounding environment won't have the market. Many refineries won't be able to sustain the pressure of the competition of import of final products, because those refineries that exist out there will be more cost efficient because they will be bigger, more cost effective and efficient. In case of the US, they have cheaper energies, and they are. And in China, we will see, well, this is not happening in the EU. They sell products, 70%, 75% of their products they sell to EU member states. And we will need to adjust our business models. Every single accountable company that employs thousands of people and another 10,000 of employees are bound to us. We will need to react to the situation. Within past 3 to 4 years, we have done very severe cuts when it comes to profit, when it comes to employment, be it in Croatia, Hungary, Slovakia, and within 4 years we have increased the internal efficiency by $500 million, in Slovakia $150 million. So currently we have the same volume of goods, but we consume by 1/4 of energy less for their production. It was expensive, but it will pay back in the future. We want to save on processing different kinds or types of oil, because there are dozens of types of oil. We have also saved a lot on purchase of energies, gas, electricity. Of course, our partners didn't like it, but that's life. There was a situation when we got connected to spot markets, Czech Republic and Hungary. There was a crisis in 2009 when Slovakia was cut off from gas from the east, and it needed to retarget itself to the west, and therefore those changes, of course, we needed to make use of this opportunity as a responsible employer. We operate in dozens of countries, and there is an interesting market situation. And if there's an interesting situation in one market, then we try to reshuffle our attention to the market with higher margin. We're trying to deliver products to low performers as well. And we do even more and more of our business activities, more and more of our trade activities relate to trading. We try to not to let our customers down. For instance, one refinery in Italy, in northern Italy we work with, imports oil from the US because it's cheaper than to import gas from Slovakia. We are trying to think and adopt such a strategy that the gas stations, the retail gas stations, are not going to offer only fuels, but other commodities. It's difficult for us to do this change, but we have changed the terminology. We are not talking about filling stations or petrol stations, but we are changing to service stations. It will take years, but the change is going on. And if we go back to the oil business, chemicals, industrial chemicals and the plastics, this has a growth potential in Europe. Those products are expensive. The materials are extremely expensive, but this is the only segment of oil industry that has a growth potential. It has certain competition from gas industry, but not all the products can be produced from the gas. So we believe that we will pay more attention to this segment in the future. Our perspective is such that it's not only us who compete with the refinery from Austria or Italy, etc. We see that there is not only a survival fight among refineries, but there is a cross-sectoral fight, oil against gas, electric energy, hydrogen energy, etc. That's okay if the sectors fight for the same customer, if the fight is fair, if there are no artificial interventions until there is no governmental interference into the market and its operation without having the capacity of assessing the real situation. As an example, I would give you that the European refineries will not really complace, will not accept the fact that biomass, for instance, subsidizing the biomass that at the beginning was in speech marks sold as much more ecological, efficient, etc., but at the end it turned out that those so-called biomass was not ecological at all, because burning the jungle in Indonesia or other countries in order to produce higher volumes of palm oil that was used as a biofuel or as a biomass fuel in Europe instead of oil, this was completely wrong concept, and this electrical energy should be subsidized by us. Electrical energy produced from renewables should be subsidized by us, and the production of such energy is transferred to traditional sectors, and we will not agree with this, because the European companies will not be able to compete with the Asian or US competitors. We will not agree if, for instance, such decisions are made in Brussels or by local governments that would support electromobiles and filling stations for electrical engines instead of the traditional ones. Once again, somebody will need to pay for it, and it is absolutely not acceptable that the tax on this electromobiles would be lower or different than the traditional tax on traditional fuels. This is not acceptable. So, of course, my colleagues would be able to give you examples, also those representing the natural gas sector or nuclear energy. All those so-called sexy and fancy solutions there is always a trick to them. Some may believe that I'm very conservative, but it's not true. What's healthy will survive. The solar energy, wind energy has proven and has grown from technological perspective, of course, also thanks to high prices, but also to innovative companies such as Schneider Electronic, etc., who managed to cut the production costs to such level that is cheaper than energy from fossil pellets. Not in Slovakia, but in Spain, it is cheaper than from coal power plant. And in 10 years, the development will be such that even in Central Europe, where the climate is not all that good as in Spain, it will really be able to compete with the traditional sectors. The development shouldn't be speeded up because it generates dozens and hundreds and millions of extra or redundant investments and costs. Some plants that were subsidized in Bavaria, in other places, needed to be closed down because the energy from renewables is not competitive with other traditional sources.
Takže ja nemám problém s tým.
I don't have problems if there is social consensus to refer some technology to others. It's okay. However, it needs to be presented with all the pluses and minuses, all the costs and profits, so that it's not just like today, quite commonly, that the profits are highlighted very much, costs are marginalized, and in the freshest, the most recent example, the costs are transformed to other industries which are not so fashionable, you know. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Thanks to all the panelists for their very inspirational and insightful speeches. And now we have practically more than 30 minutes for your questions, or comments from the audience. So if you let me, I'd like to take advantage of my position as a moderator before you may come up with your own questions or comments. This is a question for all the panelists. Where in this process you see the EU as such and its ambitions to build energy union? What are, from your perspective, the barriers? What are the challenges at hand? What would be your message for the EU in relation to this large, ambitious project? So, here you are. The questions from the audience. I'm aware that this 30 minutes is between you and lunch, but still, if I can ask the respective panelists to answer or react to my question.
So from our point of view, and it's been mentioned at the opening session, that European Energy Union, it's a very challenging project, and what is required here, it's I would say unification, standardization, measurement, integration. So in my opinion, what needs to be done in order to avoid, I would say, extreme bureaucracy and to come to the same level to implement the real measurement and standardization. So from that point of view, we should be able to measure, to automize, and to be able to compare apples to apples. So from that point of view, I would say fast implementation of smart grid would definitely help to be able to be on the same level, at least from numbers point of view, and then to speed up the implementation of European Union. So definitely smart grid is one of the tools.
Thank you very much. Pawel, would you like to comment?
Yes, I think I have to speak like this because my microphone is not working. So the technical stuff, thank you. I think from the perspective of the International Energy Agency, if one looks at the numbers, if you look at 2040, the European Union and its import dependency on fossil fuels. Thank you very much. If If you look at our projections for the European Union, you'll find that by 2040, in terms of oil imports, the European Union will be about 85% dependent on importing oil. When you turn to gas, that's going to be a share similar to that, around 80%. Coal, 60%. So in all the fossil fuels, the European Union is going to, over time, become more and more import dependent. While we can decrease our demand in certain cases, or keep it flat, unfortunately, a lot of the indigenous production in Europe is declining, so our imports will increase. Therefore, I think the concept of an energy union is a valid one, because it's trying to approach energy from a holistic approach. Looking at who are our trade partners, how can we best negotiate with them, but also looking who within this union can provide, for example, renewables the best, who can approach energy efficiency the best, and for example, how to split the European Union targets for climate change amongst the countries. So I think it's a very good initiative. Of course, the European Union is a body of politics, so it will, I suspect, be a difficult task to implement over time, but the concept of a union, I think, is very good, because we, especially as Europeans, and I think Central Europeans, have seen through history that solidarity is a very important issue to survival.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne. Môj názor na celú záležitosť je, že dala sa Európska únia na veľmi dlhú cestu. Myslím, že v tej ceste bude hrať Európska energetická únia veľmi dominantnú pozíciu, keď možno teraz to zatiaľ vyzerá ako politická proklamácia. Je to samozrejme s tým, že musíme si uvedomiť, že náš komfort a naše životné podmienky z 50% závisia od toho, čo vyvezieme. Znamená to, ako bude medzinárodne konkurencieschopná Európska únia. A energetika a energetický sektor hrajú v cenových kalkuláciách veľmi závažnú úlohu. A pán Bartel včera večer hovoril na túto tému, dostal aj otázku, ktorá sa týkala, by som povedal, rozhodovacích procesov v Nemecku.
Processes in Germany. There are also questions today about Nord Stream 2, and we cannot see the situation that Germany verbally agrees with everything related to energy union. On the other hand, a private German company is dealing with its own private political and politically economical interests. I mean, this nut needs to be cracked somewhere, sometime. And of course, this may mean impact on the foreign economic policy of the EU. And just like we have Mr. Juncker, who's pretty much the prime minister of the EU, practically, technically. So we need to face the situation. Some of the competencies of the foreign economic policy will be on the bodies of the EU, of course, with the hope that it's not going to be over-dimensioned, that there's not going to be too much bureaucracy, and the respective member states will respect the decisions of this future foreign economic policy. And what today means 60 terawatt hours in the Baltic Sea and photovoltaic power stations in Germany, what it means if they send it into the grid, and then we can actually face blackouts due to excessive energy, and we need to calculate how much the energy actually costs, just keeping off the balance. Ms. Vitaskova mentioned that they are not going to subsidize it in the Czech Republic. The question is how the parliament is going to deal with that. And renewables, that's a totally different category, and we need to realize that situation today from the respective member states, national states, it's very complicated. We need to adopt a level playing field that's going to be respected and respectable. And this is also related to one more thing. This doesn't really mean that we need to take away the regulatory competencies from the respective national states. No. Some regulatory authorities must remain with every single country, because every single country has specifics. And trying to persuade that Polish should, for example, give up their huge share of electricity generation from black coal, which is Polish domestic product, there's no way to do. So these are all the questions. They need to be tackled behind one big round table, and we need to take a look at what is the future of the Europe, whether we're going to be acting as a single body, and all these coverage maneuvers like the TTIP agreement and other things that I can personally cope with are not good solutions for Europe today. So I see big potential in energy union. I don't see future in melting this and returning to the competences of respective national states. This is not a way to go to the future, but the executive and the accountability of the executive must be different than it is today.
Thank you. The energy union and the European Union is such that we should lead to higher efficiency, transformation of the energy sector, and I could just recommend that the decision makers should talk more to business with specific businesses and corporations because yes, Pawel outlined it too well, that we want to save the planet and that the maximum increase in temperature is 2.7 degrees Celsius, but in Slovakia or European Union, it is just not realistic that the people will not work in industry.
Ktoré majú tradíciu v priemysle.
Because other countries that have a tradition in industry will keep this tradition because they cannot do anything else, so that they could employ hundreds or thousands of people who work now in industry. People cannot transform their employment, their job. For instance, those miners, all of a sudden that in a year's time they would work in services. The transformation and transition of economy needs to be gradual and slow, so that the generation that will be able to adapt will gradually be replaced by a new generation that will be able to work in another industry, but it's difficult to achieve. It's not a problem if the local or national government make mistakes, because the businesses make mistakes. We also do mistakes in SLOVNAFT, and the difference between a mistake made by politician is and the mistake in business is as such, and don't take me wrong, that when a mistake is made in business, well, we stop, review what has been done, and we try to remedy it, and it happens very swiftly. Whereas in the politics and in governments, they, the system and the way the systems are rolling out and on, this is much longer, and for years and years, the mistake may not be corrected. So I would like to see a situation where we don't need to wait 10, 15 years for a bad trend to be confirmed and reverse the situation. Well, because this is happening in the business. We can do it in much shorter time span, not 10, 15 years.
Gentleman over there, you're right.
Thank you very much. My name is Juraj Mesík. I'm with Slovak Foreign Policy Association, Climate and Energy Advisor. And I have a question which is aimed at Mr. Olejarnik. I sense a deep contradiction between the predictions that you presented concerning fossil fuels, future consumption, and the stated climate goals of European Union and the global community. If I got you correctly, on one slide you suggested that by 2040 the Chinese consumption of coal will be basically the same as is today, stagnant. Yeah? And then you also said that by 2040 the split between individual primary sources of energy will be something like 25% coal, 25% oil, 25% natural gas. Correct? Well, this appears to be, from purely scientific perspective, in a sharp contradiction to the stated goals of climate policies, if we have climate policies. Climate declarations may be more proper, parts per million of CO2. And what this predictions suggest is that we will switch from current 87 roughly percent of primary fossils in the total energy mix, global energy mix, to 75%. It's too little to really have any significant impact on the growth of CO2. So regardless, COP, Conference of Parties 21, which starts in 1 week or so, we will be on a trajectory from 400 parts per million to 450 parts per million by 2040, which is exactly the trajectory over the last 30 years. It's a almost vertical growth from the geological perspective. There's no chance with this to keep global warming at something like 2 or 2.5 Celsius grades. Last time where we had 400 parts per million of CO2, the global climate was 3 to 4 Celsius higher at 400. And we are talking that we are achieving happily 450 in next 25 years. Don't you sense a contradiction in these predictions and the stated goals? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, which is a very valid question. If you would look at our numbers, if we change nothing as of today, and we implement no policies, and we don't approach climate change as a serious issue, no new policies, business as usual, then actually the world is on a 6 degrees trajectory in terms of climate change. The proposals that are being submitted in Paris, should they be implemented? Because one thing is putting the proposals down and then implementing them. That's another case. But according to our numbers, if you just put them down, that means 2.7 degrees Celsius. So between 6 and 2.7, that's already a big step. So I think that should be commended, that at least in Paris, we're finally arriving at a situation where there is a potential. Of course, it's not yet the 2 degrees target. For that, you have to do much more. You were quoting a lot of numbers, so I clearly see you've studied the World Energy Outlook very well, so thank you very much for that. But if you want a 2 degrees world, even in a 2 degrees world, according to our numbers, fossil fuels will still account for 60% of total energy in 2040. The transition is not going to happen so abruptly. We're consuming around 80% today. If we want 2 degrees, so very environmentally strong, it's going to go to 60% of fossil fuels. We can't get rid of fossil fuels that quickly. In power plants, for example, it is quite easy to decarbonize. We can shift to gas, renewables, nuclear, such as the Slovak Republic is at the forefront of nuclear power. But transport is a big issue. Transport right now is running mainly on oil. So if you look at our numbers, in a 2 degrees world, it's actually transport that starts emitting more emissions than the power sector. So I think what's happening in Paris is the right step, but clearly more has to be done, more has to be promoted in terms of low carbon fuels, and more investments have to take place in energy efficiency.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yeah, please. Another question.
Dobrý deň, ja som Urban z tej asociácie pre využitie obnoviteľných alternatívnych zdrojov. Ja by som sa pána Baláža spýtal pána Senkoviča. Keďže ja som sa včera vrátil konkrétne z Číny.
I returned from China last night. We are activating ourselves in China. So how can you envision cooperation of Central European countries with China? I mean, taking account into the geopolitical change and adjusting to the geopolitical change and taking advantage of it. How can Slovakia or Central Europe take advantage of its science and research potential in order to improve the environment in the People's Republic of China, and how it could attract Chinese capital into new technology here in this territory? I'll start maybe from a wider perspective. You know, the period of short and swift solutions is over. Today we have only complicated solutions and perhaps only expensive solutions. Let me give you one example that may sound a bit irrelevant, but it's far from true. Sources from GDP in China into education should achieve 3% of GDP.
Škandinávia má asi 2,6 a Slovensko malo v lani 0,44 a minulý týždeň schválil náš parlament rozpočet na 0,40.
GDP. And last year, it was last week the budget was approved for 0.41% in Slovakia. And in the end, it's all about reducing consumption and realizing that cheapest energy is the energy which is not consumed, etc., etc. You know, China started to be totally ready, and we still not fully appreciate it. We don't fully appreciate that. And just one piece of fact that just occurred to me: 1/2 of all students studying in the USA in the prestigious universities are from Greater China. That's China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And these students will return to China, and they will carry out essential change in the economy, and everybody in China will be listening to them. So in the next couple of years, the question is not going to be whether we'll let Chinese do something. The question is going to be whether Chinese actually will need us to do something they need. So isn't this high technological development, you know, we're selling this Chinese every day because they are willing to pay, and we somehow balancing our production impotence of the European companies or enterprises. So the whole system that we were used to in the past, like we are the dominant power in the world in terms of technology and military, that was the United States perhaps, but this whole system is breaking down. And now, about the potential cooperation. Everything obviously has two sides. There's two sides to every coin. And today, basically everything related to photovoltaics is produced. Even the Germans are now held by Chinese hands. So everything in relation to photovoltaics is produced in Chinese hands. So they have very strong influence on everything that's moving in Europe. And if you ask me, let's push a great deal of money into education, and let's assume the position that we used to have many years ago. Let's create a system so that we can renew the research and science base, and let's pray. These three factors could perhaps produce a synergy strong enough to help us. And now we not only have to pray for this to work, but China is far from over. China is now breathing in, and now they're trying to do the second step. They absorbed our technology know-how, and quite soon they will transform our technology know-how in their own enterprise. They will export technological know-how to Europe, and in 2 or 3 years' time we will find out there's a first Chinese car maker, and Volkswagen and Jaguar will realize they're too expensive in comparison to the Chinese car makers, you know. And when it comes to renewables, this is obviously there's a great deal of consequences and associations and relations mutually linked. Everything that Chinese people do is extremely cheap. And perhaps logically we'll find out that it's more effective and more profitable to import everything from China, especially those products which are energy demanding, energy intensive. The question remains, what are we going to use to pay for that? What are we going to pay with? Because there might be nothing to pay with. And there's a book in America, I think it's called Made in China, and this book says how the American businesses were operating, and the American businessman operating in China says that you can only advance in technology without any break, and after some years the Chinese will resign, like, okay, this is too complicated for us, we need to buy this technology from someone else because they are advancing too quickly. You know, this is the only way how to outperform China in research technology. Even though it may sound that everything is about coal and old ways of power generation and east and west, no. Whether we like it or not, in the end, there must be competitiveness at the end of every sentence, because this is the key word. This is the key word to mention once again, competitiveness.
I would like to follow up, because if we imply this on the refinery sector, the Chinese Indians really represent high-level competition. I'm not sure whether I would still support competitiveness, that whether I would share know-how with them so that they produce even cheaper. We have mentioned it a couple of times already. There are about 100 refineries in Europe, but only few that have such a level of equipment and facilities as in Bratislava when it comes to conversion of oil products. So we have been talking about savings, and it's not all that known that if you buy 1 ton of oil, you only get 60% of fuels, gas and diesel, and remaining 40% are waste or byproducts, and standard refineries still produce in this way. That 40% of oil is waste. Our refinery has a conversion rate at the level of 80%. That means, 86% of products made from oil are such that are unique for oil, and Mercedes was preferred, and only 14% is waste that cannot be somehow recycled or reused in diesel production or plastic. Well, the question is whether we should allow some Chinese refinery that is at 60% to grow to 80%. Well, as Professor has said, we want to hunt them by our technological leadership. This is most probably also applicable to military industry. We always, you want to take a lead, you want to be the first when it comes to competition. One thing is to assist countries in Africa or Arab countries with no access to drinking water. That's a different thing, to provide them the best technologies so that they can desalinate the water, and maybe the migration wouldn't be so strong as it is now. So yes, we could provide them with solar panels so that 1 billion of people do have access to electricity, to provide them with the technology so that they don't need to burn the rainforest, so that they don't need to run into Europe, but supporting some competitor that is now weaker but could be much stronger in the future. I'm not sure whether this is a good idea. We are responsible for our people, for our employees. China has almost unlimited resources to invest into their own know-how. We want to keep the lead we have in terms of competition. If there are no more questions, thank you. I'd like to thank all the panelists for very inspirational comments. I believe they deserve applause. And 2 messages from organizers. 1, there's going to be a press conference with Mr. Olejarnik on the World Energy Outlook, and at 2:30 there will be sfpa presentation of their paper, their policy paper of Visegrad for energy security and energy markets. Challenges ahead. So thank you very much and bon appétit.